Every town has a dark side. For years, too many years actually, the Wackers asked themselves the same questions over and over. Who, how, and most of all, why? Because for nearly a decade, Bill and Dorothy Wacker, who were just a peaceful elderly couple living in small-town Ohio, were the victims of constant and persistent harassment. Harassment that defied logic and only continued to escalate over the years. What began with vandalism, prank calls, and disturbing noises outside their home quickly reached frightening levels. Threats, invasions of privacy, and even several episodes of physical violence. A harasser had cruel intentions, though their motives remain a mystery. No matter how hard they tried, the Wackers and the authorities could never catch who did this. Hey guys, it's Andrew, and thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Everytown, where today we're looking into a very unique and uncomfortable story that revolves around, aside from what they experienced, a relatively normal American couple who was harassed by an unknown stalker for close to 10 years. So let's head down to Stark County, Ohio, and hear all about the terrifying intruder of Bill and Dorothy Wacker. William Lewis Wacker, who everyone just called Bill, was born on March 12th of 1920 in Massillon, Ohio. He served as a first-class private in the United States Army and fought for his country during World War II. After returning from duty, he would meet his partner in life, Dorothy Jean, who was born on April 21st of 1927, also in Massillon, Ohio. They tied the knot sometime in the 1950s, were very much in love and raised two daughters together. For many years, and they were just another family that lived in their community, and their lives were completely normal in a small town in Stark County, Ohio. The Wackers had no problems with anyone, at least that they were aware of, and they were friendly with all their neighbors and had no known enemies until the harassment began. And there's no exact date and time for when this all started. Things slowly began to happen around them, and whether or not they all tied together is up for debate, though it appears they all are. But the major incident that they view as a starting point of the torment happened one day back in 1984. Bill and Dorothy were returning home one evening from a night out to their old familiar house where they had lived for the last 30 years at this point, when they encountered a distressing scene. And pulling in the driveway, they knew immediately something had happened. And upon entering the home, saw it was essentially in ruins. And somebody had broken in, and whatever their intentions, they left nothing untouched. Every cupboard and drawer in the kitchen was open. The contents of what was inside, plates, glasses, forks, strewn on the floor. Chairs and tables were flipped upside down. The dresser drawers in their bedroom had been rummaged through. Everything was in utter disarray. And Bill would have been about 64 years old around this time, his wife 58. The scene left them speechless, and feeling of being violated was something they could never shake. They thought they had lived in a safe place, so for this to happen was very jarring. Not only were their things flipped upside down, but now their feeling of security was as well. But here's the weird part. While the scene presented seemed to indicate that someone had broken in to steal, nothing of value or importance to the Wackers was missing. In fact, nothing at all. Even things like jewelry that were left out in the open weren't taken. And so, what was this person's true intentions? For this first incident, for some reason that will never be completely clear, the Wackers did not consider this break-in serious enough to even report it to the police. And they probably thought it was a prank by an immature child, maybe a clumsy thief. The fact that nothing was taken threw them off a bit, and they just decided to clean it up and move on with their lives. However, this was just the start of it all. And the same thing would happen again. The Wackers would leave the house, only to return to find it completely destroyed. Yet once again, they did nothing. At least not until the person or persons behind it made it abundantly clear that it was personal, that they were doing this strictly to mess with them. On January 16, 1985, the episode repeated itself a third time, and this one prompted the Wackers to call the authorities.
Hello?
And the police reports noted that nothing was missing, or if it was, the Wackers didn't realize it. But this served to show that the home had been broken into, at least on this occasion, and now they wanted the person caught. But the police investigation into this led nowhere. While the house was ransacked, not a single fingerprint was found. No one saw anything. No neighbors heard anything. It just sort of happened. Things, which were already looking pretty bad, escalated dramatically in July of '85. Just 6 months after the Wackers filed their first formal complaint with the police. On this day, Dorothy was home alone, recovering from heart surgery, and working in the kitchen when someone knocked on the door. She got up and went to answer it. Dorothy opened the door, and on her porch stood a man, a young man no more than 25 years old, who greeted her politely and told her he was having car trouble and asked if he could use her phone. At first, Dorothy didn't notice anything strange about this courteous and polite individual, seemingly in need of some help. The only problem was that the man's supposed vehicle was nowhere to be seen. As she asked him where his car was, he explained that it was at the end of the street, just out of sight from where they stood on the porch. This was a bit odd, to say the least, because if his car was in fact at the end of the street, well, why didn't he ask someone else for help? Why walk all the way to the Wackers' home to ask for a simple phone call? Because after all, theirs wasn't the only house for miles, just one more in the neighborhood of many. But Dorothy probably didn't ask herself any of these questions. Things were very different in '85, long before crime shows, documentaries, YouTube channels in every town, where everywhere you're being warned of what happens when you let the wrong ones in. And so Dorothy pointed out where the phone was, went back to the kitchen, where she could hear the man dialing a number, making his call, and talking to someone, and finally calling for a tow truck. After a few minutes on the phone, the stranger hung up. He thanked Dorothy, said goodbye. The woman replied, "You're welcome," and returned to the kitchen, where she could hear the sound of her front door closing. The problem was that she was never in the front foyer to see that the man never left. She never saw him leave, and she never heard him approach. At least not until the stranger hit her over the head so hard that Dorothy immediately lost consciousness. When she finally came to, found a scene very similar to what she and her husband had witnessed on previous occasions. And the house once again had been ransacked, not a stone or couch cushion left unturned. And Dorothy was lying on the floor, gagged and tied up in a manner so intricate that it was impossible for her to get out. Still bound, she managed to crawl to the window nearby, make herself heard by the neighbors, who saw her and then called the police. Bill returned home, aware of what had happened, and at this point, a line had been crossed. If things continue to escalate like this, well, what's the end game here? Inside his home, it was filled with police, who, after giving him time to talk to his wife and make sure she was okay, asked for his help in searching the home to see if anything was missing. The police really wanted to get as much serious offenses on this guy so they could put the resources into tracking him down. And sure enough, this time the stalker took an old watch, a video camera, radio scanner, and a .22 caliber revolver. The mysterious figure hadn't just taken things, he also left something behind. In the dining room, written on the wall, what could only be crayon, was the following phrase: "Cheaper, but will do." A message as strange as it was ambiguous. What was cheaper exactly, and what will do? The police investigated the crime scene, questioned the neighbors. They searched for evidence, but once again, it all led to a dead end. There wasn't a single fingerprint, single hair, single shoe print. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. Simply put, there was no thread to pull. The police questioned Dorothy, but the most she could give them was a more or less general description of the man. A young blonde individual with light eyes, from which a composite sketch was made that, although Dorothy confirmed as the spitting image of the man who attacked her, was never identified. It can be said with almost complete certainty that the Wackers, their friends, their family, and the authorities must have asked themselves the same question over and over again during the nearly 8 years that this situation lasted. Why? I mean, really, what did this mysterious person want? To hurt the Wackers? To have fun? Was it someone with a personal grudge against the elderly couple that they were unaware they had wronged? Was it revenge, perhaps? The scenarios were so strange, and the complete lack of evidence would have some people thinking that perhaps the Wackers knew more than they were letting on. That maybe they didn't report those original break-ins because they knew exactly who was doing this and feared retaliation. A few months after the attack on his wife, when Bill Wacker returned home in November of '85, one thing would become clear. Whatever the stalker's motives, they were not going to stop. On his porch, right in front of his door, the elderly man found an object wrapped in a plastic bag. Curious, he bent down to pick it up and unwrapped it, and it was the revolver that had disappeared from his home months ago. The message was clear. Not only was he letting them know it hadn't been a robbery, in a way, it was as if he was giving them the opportunity to defend themselves, almost as if he was telling them that no matter how much they prepared, sooner or later he would succeed in his goal, whatever it was. In the months that followed, this dynamic repeated itself. The scanner, the camera, the watch, one by one, all the stolen items were returned to the Wacker house under the same strange circumstances, and once again the investigation led to a dead end. Whatever the motive, the stalker was taking his personal crusade against the Wackers very, very seriously. The next level to the harassment manifested itself in the phone ringing. The couple received a large number of threatening phone calls. The phone rang several times a day, at the most erratic and random times with no discernible pattern. In the morning, at night, in the afternoon, at dawn. And these calls never lasted more than 20 or 30 seconds, but the person on the other end of the line always had a threatening tone. And sometimes he insulted and threatened the Wackers. On one occasion, Dorothy answered the phone, only to hear a voice say, "I will hit you on the head harder next time." And sometimes the stalker would just scream and hurl obscene insults. Sometimes they would laugh out loud. Other times, they would just stay on the line and breathe heavily into the phone before hanging up. Fed up, the Wackers changed their number, but the calls never stopped. No matter how many times they changed it and kept it unlisted, the stalker always managed to find it and continue to torment them. New questions arose because of this. Could it be someone close to the Wackers? A neighbor or relative who, for some disturbing reason, enjoyed doing this to them? In the next run of events, the mysterious figure would approach the Wackers' home at night, knock on the door, but when Bill arrived at it, no one was there. On other occasions, the person would run hastily through the backyard of the house, banging on the outside walls, doors, and windows, always disappearing long before anyone could arrive to find out what was happening. In response to these actions, Bill felt it necessary to install a motion sensor, big bright lights on the outside of the house that would get the attention of neighbors if someone was lurking, a strategy that unfortunately proved futile. The morning after installing them, he found a note wedged between the porch boards. On this piece of paper, written in a clumsy and messy scrawl, was the following phrase: "Your lights are a laugh." In addition to that, it said, "Sunday, didn't you come next time?" and "Called but didn't answer." While they didn't necessarily make sense, the period of notes had now begun. And he did this for a long period of time, in between the disturbances, phone calls, threats, and all his strategies. Inexplicable, absurd notes that, despite being analyzed by the authorities, yielded no evidence. The only thing that became reasonably clear was that the notes probably were written by someone using their non-dominant hand to avoid suspicion and leave no evidence. By the time October of 1993 arrived, the Wackers had essentially become accustomed to the serious pranks of this sinister figure who lingered around their home. The man operated in waves, harassing them intensely for long periods of time, then disappearing for weeks or months, only to return when he felt the need. And the police couldn't help, and so the Wackers kept note of the incidents, but for the most part, didn't even report them to anyone. Police patrol cars would sit outside their home. After weeks of nothing happening, they would return to regular duty, and then a note or more calls would come in. By this time, Bill and his wife's story had gotten around, and they had been interviewed on more than one occasion, and both husband and wife shared the idea that, for some reason unknown to them, the stalker seemed unusually interested in convincing them to move. One might think that after 8 years of persistence, without much success, the stalker would have preferred to give up, but nothing could be further from the truth. On the night of October 27th of 93, Dorothy decided to go out into her backyard to get some fresh air with her dog. And at that moment, without her seeing or hearing anything, someone snuck into the backyard and crept up to her, and once again hit her on the head and knocked her out cold. Bill heard his wife fall, and he found her on the ground, bleeding severely from the head. He rushed her to the hospital where she needed multiple stitches, and it was confirmed that she had several significant lacerations to her head and a concussion. At this point, the authorities felt the need to explore all possibilities. Not only was this stalker's timing impeccable, but in all this time, all the sneaking around the house and break-ins and violent physical encounters, how had nobody else witnessed anybody around there? The only person to ever see him was Dorothy. Dorothy. For the police, yeah, it all kept coming back around to Dorothy. Was it possible that somehow this was all a scheme by her to get attention or to force her husband to move? After all, no one but her saw the person who attacked her on 2 occasions, and the composite sketch, based on her description, never helped identify anyone. Or what if she made it all up? That would explain how someone could approach her in the middle of the night without her dog getting anxious or warning her in any way, and also why no one else has ever seen anything. And could she have actually hit herself over the head with an object? Well, the answer is yes. It would take some guts, but you could do it if you really wanted to. In fact, a lot of these incidents could have been made up when you really think about it. Though, after the first assault, when police arrived, Dorothy was tied up in a way that they all agreed was impossible for her to have done on her own. And so, was Bill actually involved in this too? Were they together, looking for attention or perhaps to frame somebody in some long, drawn-out way? Or maybe, what if Bill was in cahoots with the man who hit his wife the first time? That would explain why she didn't hear or see her attacker approach her the second time, and why the dog wasn't alerted. And maybe that's how the stalker kept getting the new phone number for the house. With all these scenarios, the problem always remains the same though. Why would one or both of them do any of this? Knowing that they were actually being considered as the possible culprits at this point, in November of '93, a month after the attack, Bill devised a plan to catch the stalker once and for all. He and Dorothy, along with 4 other family members to assist them, would take turns watching the house and looking for anything suspicious. They would divide into 3 teams of 2. Bill and a partner would hide in a parked trailer at the end of the street, while 2 of Bill's son-in-laws would remain hidden in a parked truck across the street. The plan would unfold at night, the vehicles positioned to blend in and not to disrupt the normalcy of the area. And this way, the stalker would come to do his mischief, unaware that he was being trapped. And meanwhile, Dorothy and one of her daughters remained in the living room of the house, hoping that everything would go smoothly. And armed with radios and other equipment to keep communications open, the family took up their positions and remained vigilant for hours. The men were a safe distance away, but still close enough to reach the house quickly if anything happened. And finally, around 10:30 p.m., just as the family was about to call it a night, Dorothy and her daughter heard a noise coming from the front door, as if someone had thrown something there. Dorothy reported the noise, and both Bill and his son-in-laws rushed in to see what was happening. They arrived really quick, but all they found was a rock with a note tied to it. In a manner as inexplicable as all their previous escapades, the stalker had managed to slip away into the darkness without being seen by anyone. And the note tied to the stone read, "Get the message?" On May 25th of 1994, in the 23rd episode of the 6th season of Unsolved Mysteries, the case of the mysterious figure that haunted the Wacker family for almost 10 years was brought to the small screen. Obviously, though, no major answers were ever given. The "Get the Message" note was the last event related to the case that was ever officially reported. It's not clear if the harasser actually stopped after that day, or if the Wackers just got tired of complaining about it. After all, this mysterious man seemed to know everything about them, their habits, their daily routines. He always had their phone numbers and was aware of all the strategies the couple used to catch him, even the latest surveillance. Was it a family member or a friend, a trusted neighbor who wanted them out of the area, maybe a twisted cop or investigator, or the Wackers themselves? We'll probably never know. 5 years later, on July 9th of 1999, Bill passed away at the age of 79. Dorothy, his life partner, survived him for another 11 years, passing away on July 22nd of 2010 at the age of 83. And neither of them ever moved away from the home, and neither would ever know the truth behind this mystery. That is, of course, unless they were involved. So that's it for this week's episode of Everytown. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're in the mood for some even darker content, please consider supporting us over on Patreon. It's free to try. We put out new episodes every single week, plus there's a whole library for you to check out. Remember to come back next week for another episode filled with scary, strange, and mysterious stories, because you never know. Maybe your town will be next.